Hi, this is Nancy Love. I want to talk about one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Yeah, I get into some heavy stuff on this channel. As far as I understand it, biblically, in what used to be called the Revelations, but now apparently it's been Mandela affected, and it's called Revelation. Like the definite article is there, and it's singular. In Revelation, it talks about the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and during the end of this great cycle that the Hopi people talked about, and that everybody else talks about, or some people call it Armageddon. These definitely are the end times, believe me. We have to deconstruct in order to reconstruct, in order to resurrect and make new lives. We have to disassemble what has gone before, because the old paradigm is shifting and the old paradigm is fading and the old paradigm has failed not only humankind but every species hereupon in the world. So we need to get back to the garden, as Joni Mitchell was saying. We've got to get ourselves back to the garden. Oh wait, we're in it. It was always here. It was humanity that just spoiled it. In Revelation, it talks about false prophecy as being one of the four uh, aspects of the end times that's going to destroy the old paradigm. It talks about pestilence. Hey, what is COVID? What was Ebola? What was Zika virus? We got pestilence. It talks about famine. Approximately 25,000 people starve to death every single day, and that's been the case pretty much all my life. So famine has been well in place, often used as genocide by vicious, hideous men who would deny children food. That's an act of war. And it talks about war as being the fourth horseman of the apocalypse. And there's been chronic war every day of my life. Somewhere on this planet, some stupid group of people is arguing with some other stupid group of people, because apparently people aren't smart enough to actually get along with each other for 5 minutes. And that's a shame. And it's going to shame the whole planet, and it's going to certainly shame the species, because war we've got, pestilence we've got, a famine we've had, which is completely unjustifiable. The United States alone throws away something like 5 billion pounds of food every day, when we could get kids fed. That should be easy. Spend less money on bombs and bullets, more money on trucks and food. Yeah, think. But let's get to false prophecy. How could people lying be part of what destroys the world? Well, here's how. I have known several so called Christian ministers who are so fake. They are complete frauds. And they'll tell you so if you get to know them and put them in some context which disinhibits them. Um, Alcohol, too much stimulants, exhaustion, any kind of dehydration, these things can cause people to babble the truth, even when the truth is something they don't want out, because they hide behind facade of lies. They cower like cowards behind a bull bleak facade that isn't them and has never been true. And that's the only way they can get over in the world, right? I knew a Christian minister, so called, who started his own church and rented out space and had all these people come and give him accolades and, glowing eyes, and treat him like he was the god of their world, when in point of fact he was participating in a drug and rape and human trafficking ring. He told me this in a form of confession when he talked about having sexually assaulted someone. And he said that other than being in the rape ring, he had been entirely true to his wife of 30 something years. I said, I'm pretty sure your wife would consider raping other human beings, cheating on her. Yeah, pretty sure about that. She was an elementary school teacher and real straight And then there was another guy who's, I think, significantly more dangerous. He runs what he calls an institute. And he had, last I counted, more than 10 years ago, he had about 10,000 members. Yeah, of his institute, and it was a new age, ancient wisdom kind of thing where he didn't just proselytize for the cause of Christ. He embraced, or seemed to be embracing, all paths to light, and what he was a complete fraud. And the reason I'm telling you this, and the reason I know for a fact, that this so-called spiritual leader who literally put himself on the level of the Dalai Lama, but also once asked me if I thought he might be the Antichrist, and was disappointed when I said, "No, I don't think you will be that important to human history." He got crestfallen and disappointed because I didn't think he was the Antichrist. Who wants that job? I mean, really, God, people are foul. He was on heroin after one of his church services. And I walked up to him and I was going to thank him for, because I knew that the congregation had helped some people in Haiti after a bad earthquake and tsunami. And I said, I appreciate what you built here. You know, you're helping people all over the world. This is great. And he started laughing at me. The whites of his eyes were as red as my shirt. The whites of his eyes. You look like a science fiction character. Apparently, that's what heroin can do to your eyes. And he said that he was a complete charlatan. That all these people, see all these people, they just handed me their money. You see all these people walking out of my church. He called them marks and patsies and idiots for handing him money. He said that he was making money two ways from sick people, and he kind of sort of felt guilty about it. And he started shuffling his feet, looking sad, because he said sick people will call him to their houses and they'll pay him to pray for them, and he'll demand that they pray away their illnesses, and he'll condescend to them and said, if only you were praying correctly, you wouldn't be ill. And then when they died, often the same family survivors would pay him to look after to officiate at their memorial services, during which he once again blamed them for their problems and said if only they'd been better people, they wouldn't have been sick to begin with. That's a lie. Bad diseases happen to good people, period. No one is quite sure why, but he does not have the answer. And he admitted that every time he needs a new $1 million, listen, people, I've been called a creative genius all my life, but I can't make crap like this up. This guy actually said every time he needed a new $1 million, he writes a book blaming people for their own problems. And he said that he found people are so stupid that they'll actually pay him to tell him, to tell them that they're responsible for every bad thing that ever happened to me. He said a plane could fall out of the sky into somebody's head, and he'd tell their family that they deserved it and they brought it on themselves. And he said he found out that people will pay him millions upon millions of dollars over the course of many years to blame them for every bad thing. When he was sitting there admitting that he knew that they weren't responsible, and that he was lying to them in all of his books and a very famous film he had something to do with. He was a complete charlatan, a complete fraud. He also said he was money laundering for an international cabal of some sort, that he was selling heroin out the back door of the church, I guess, that he had a harem, that his wife didn't like it, but they had a decidedly open marriage, and he was using his place as a minister to convince a lot of women who ordinarily would have entreated their husbands, or wouldn't have promiscuous sex with some guy. He was convincing them by virtue of his power over them as their minister and presumable spiritual leader to sexually influence them. And it went on and on. And this guy is really well thought of in the so-called spiritual movement, and he gets all the money while you and I sit around and actually try to work for a living. This guy's a complete fraud, and he'll tell you so when he's on heroin. And he goes around making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year at seminars, and people think he's a good person. Talk about a facade. Oh yeah, I also knew someone who said that that so-called minister had recruited him into the use of cocaine and into the human trafficking of completely innocent non-prostitute victims. Someone told me in Los Angeles back in 2016 that that so-called minister had him go to a bunch of meetings at the so-called church. A bunch of prominent, powerful people were there, and they convinced him to become involved in drugging, raping, and trafficking people who would never willingly prostitute themselves at all. Lastly, I will tell you about a guy I met much more recently. Um, he was a fairly new minister at a fairly new age type of church that's still Christian based, always flapping his lips and talking about Christ, yada da yada da yada da, preaching about God. But when you get to know him, he'll tell you the real reason his wife divorced him was because he had sexually assaulted her, abused her psychologically, demanded that she call him his her master. He said, I made her call me her master. I was so proud. I thought, you should be in jail. I hope that woman gets him arrested. He also was able to convince a judge, whether crooked or well meaning or, bamboozled or not, I don't know. He actually got custody of some young children. And he said he was so proud of himself the day he took the kids away from her. She had nothing. He kept the house, he kept the kids, he kept his job, he kept his reputation. But I'm sure that that happens a lot. The good spouse is discredited, abused, belittled, disadvantaged financially, perhaps. And I think that the judges do award the wrong parent custody sometimes. But the judge may or may not know that they're being fooled. So that's my take on Christian ministers. That's my take on people who put themselves above the rest of us and call them our spiritual leaders. I try to see through those people. I'm sure that there are a handful of good ones. I'm sure that there are some real people who are truly committed to goodness and kindness and decency and compassion. And I'm sure that some of them lead churches, and some of those churches are called Christian churches. But I also know that every single person that I've discussed in this video has abnegated their responsibility to Christ. There's nothing Christian about these people. And if Christ could look you in the face right now, Christ would tell you that that consciousness is deeply ashamed to be in any way associated with rapists, drug dealers, human traffickers, egotists, self-aggrandizing megalomaniac nut jobs who've made themselves famous by using and misusing his very good name. Think on these things, my friend.